Hello. So, as you probably realize from listening, this is a Squier Affinity from 2001, and it has some problems, some small issues that we could easily take care of. But I think, as I am going to take this guitar apart anyway, I'm thinking, let's see if we can make it play as well as a really expensive Stratocaster. Something along the lines of maybe a custom shop. Of course, there are limitations to what we can do, but it doesn't mean that we can't have fun with it and that we can't try to make this guitar play better than it's ever played before. But first, we have to take this guitar apart, because there are some problems with the electronics anyway. So I'm going to start by taking off the strings and then taking off all the hardware and then removing the neck from the body. I've taken the strings off, and now I'm going to start taking all the screws out and taking the tremolo off, taking the neck off, taking the tuners off, taking out all the electronics. My goal with this guitar is to show that you can just take something that maybe no one wants any longer, and by just giving it some love and care, we're going to make this play awesome again. So I'm not going to replace anything unless I really have to, because the electronics are a bit weird. So once I get in there, we'll see if I have no other choice than switching something else. But otherwise, I'm not going to do it, because I see a lot of videos of people saying like, oh, this is a great guitar, but you have to change the pickups and you have to change the tuners and you have to do this and that. And the thing is that, yeah, sure, it's a great guitar, but it's only great after you've done a lot of work to it and put a lot of extra money into it. And by that time, you might as well just buy a whole other guitar that already have all the good parts. So I'm just going to take it apart for now, and we'll see when I come back to it if it's absolutely necessary to switch something out, but hopefully not. So here is the tremolo system, and as you can probably see, hopefully, with the camera, as you can probably see, there is a lot of rust and gunk. So we're going to take everything apart to its smallest component, and then we're going to put them all in a bucket together with all the other parts, and then we're going to clean them. But that's for a later date. And now for the moment we've all been waiting for. We're going to unscrew the jack and see what's wrong with it. And hopefully it's just a question of cleaning some gunk out. I don't know where this guitar has been before I bought it, but whoever had it didn't really take care of it. Or at least didn't know how to take care of it, which is fine, of course. Not everyone does. It's very easy to let things go. Huh. Here it is. And I can't say that I immediately see something that's wrong with it, but maybe there is. I'm gonna have to take a closer look at it. But first, we're gonna cut these off and just put it in the bin with the rest of the parts that need cleaning. Okay, so now we've removed the screws, so let's take our first look and see what's going on underneath the pickguard. And there we have it. Big pool routing, so if I want humbuckers, I can go for that. Let's take a closer look at the electronics. So here we can see the 3 pickups, and they look like any Squier pickups would look. Nothing unusual there that I didn't think I would see. I know that the pickups work. The problem is somewhere around here. It's most likely the switch, because that's where I feel that things are happening when I'm playing the guitar. And if we look real closely here, we can see that, for instance, the wire here has some weird gunk on it. I don't know if that's very easy to see, but it's right there. But the pots are big and nice, so I think that maybe just cleaning out the switch will help with the electronics, so we might not have to switch any parts out. The routing for the tremolo system has this weird little extra cut-in and a weird drill mark. I don't really know what that is all about. I've never seen that on a Squier or any other kind of Stratocasters before. So if anyone out there knows if this is just a Affinity 2000 era thing, you know, let me know. I'd like to learn something new. So, and now everything is apart, and we don't need the body anymore because we're going to focus on the neck first. So, we can put this away somewhere safe where we won't get scratched. So, now it's only thing left to do is removing the tuners. So now I'm going to clamp the neck down so I can reshape the back of it. I've made a clamping hole for the neck that doesn't touch the threads. And the only way I've made this is by cutting slots that fits over the threads, so that when I clamp down the neck, the threads don't get damaged. Now, I'm gonna start off by sanding this off, and then I'm slowly gonna remove just a tiny bit of wood, because I don't want to remove too much, because it's almost exactly the way I want the neck to feel. But I'm gonna make it a bit smoother and take some of this gloss off, just to make it feel like an old, well-played instrument. I first sand the entire neck with my machine sander with 180 grit sandpaper. And after I've done that, I start sanding with hand sandpaper, and I go up to 400 grit. So, now I've sanded the neck down up to 400 grit, and it's a perfectly fine place to stop if you want to. The neck is really nice and smooth and feels really comfortable. But I'm gonna go the extra mile and put finish on it and smooth the finish out with 1200 grit sandpaper to get it that extra smooth that just melts your hand into the neck when you play it. Now, to do that, you could use true oil if you want to. It's a perfectly fine finish, and it makes this really, really nice, and I've done that a lot of times. You could also go for Crimson Guitars oil if you want to. It's a really, really nice one. I recommend that too. It's basically the same finish. But what I use, and what I think is the best, is regular old teak oil. This is what I consider the best out of the three. You could also experiment with other things, like shellac and Danish oil, but I haven't really done that yet myself, so I can't recommend it. But so what I'm going to do now is that I'm going to just start putting some on with tissue, and then I'm going to use sandpaper, 1200 grit, and push it into the grain of the wood. Now, I'm going to repeat this process like 3 times or something like that. I'm just going to do this until the neck feels tacky, and then I'm going to leave it to dry, and then I'm going to come back and redo it again until I feel like the neck just feels like, I don't know, a baby's bottom or something like that. I don't know. Something smooth and perfect. So one layer at a time, building up a nice, comfortable finish, and then we're going to leave it to dry for maybe something like 2 days, I think, would be enough. As we're waiting for the back of the neck to dry, I'm going to take a razor blade and I'm just going to round over the sides of the fretboard. This will make the neck even more easy to play and more comfortable and just melt even more into your hand. This neck is 20 years old, and so I'm not going to have to do a lot because it's already pretty round over, but I can get it just a little bit extra round over. So that's what I'm going to do right now. So what I do is I hold the neck in place and I just gently, very gently, I just take off maybe something along the line of 1/2 mil. I'm just scraping away. You'll have to feel it with your finger and remove a tiny bit more. Always remove less, because as you probably realize, you can always take off a little bit more, but you can't glue it back on. So I'm just gently removing a tiny bit and feeling it. Okay, so here you can see the round over side and the side that I haven't got to yet. And just by that tiny bit amount of wood taken off, there's a really big difference. Now I'm going to go and do the other side as well. So now that I've rounded over the edges of the fretboard, I'm just going to take a pencil with a little bit of water and I'm just going to put some water on the edges. And this is just a tiny bit of amount of water, and the reason why I do that is because I want to soften up that edge when I later go to sand it, because the reason why these fret ends are soft on an old vintage guitar is not because someone sanded it, it's actually because someone's played the guitar and their fingers and the sweat from them have pulled away the wood. And that's why if you do this sloppy, you won't get a very good result, because you can feel the difference between a tool making it and a hand doing it. So that's why I'm going back and forth and I'm just spreading out some water, because that's going to raise the grain. And I don't worry about this tiny amount of water like destroying the fretboard or anything like that, because we're talking about like just a dip of water basically for the entire neck, and it's drying super quickly and it's just raising the grain where I've cut it. So now it's dried and the grain has raised. You can see it by how it's a lighter colored where I scraped, and the darker color is still in the middle of the fretboard. So now I'm taking some 1200 grit sandpaper, wet and dry, and I'm just going back and forth and I'm smoothing it out. You could take something that is has a little bit more grit to it to begin with if you want to make this go faster, but I really like to make it feel like it's been played in, which is a unique feeling that I don't think you can really get unless you actually try to figure out how something gets played in. So I just go back and forth with wet paper and I just try to knock everything down and make it so as smooth as I possibly can. And this is something that takes a long time, but I think that it's something worth doing. So I'm gonna do that, and we'll be back once I've gone through the entire neck. So now we're back, and all of the sides have been rounded over, and with sandpaper we've smoothed them out. I can't really tell you how this feels, but it feels like soft silk or something. Very, very nice and smooth. And it has a very nice round over feel to it, where you basically can't tell where the edge really is any longer, the way you could before. And to me it's very, very close to how an old guitar feels after being played for maybe 40 years or 50 years or something. Okay, the next step is to take masking tape and put it all over the fretboard. So now we've taped off the fretboard, and the reason why we've done that is because it's much easier to just tape it off now and then remove the tape once we're done and the fretboard is clean and neat and we can put some oil on it, instead of having to clean it for, I don't know, an hour to try to get all the metal flakes and tiny dust particles out of it. So I recommend that you tape the fretboard off if you're gonna do something like fixing the frets. I've checked this neck and we don't need to level the frets or anything like that. There are a bit of gunk on them and they are a bit dull, but that's okay. I am going to show you now how I do to make them look like mirrors, which is super nice when you're playing the guitar, to have really nice shiny frets. So that's what's coming up next. Okay, so what I do is that I take some wet and dry paper that is a 1200 grid on it, and I roll it over my finger. You've probably seen a lot of other YouTubers do this. And then I just go back and forth over the neck and smooth everything out. I have this polishing wheel that I bought at the hardware store. It was only a couple of bucks, and you get this polishing paste with it. And all I do is that I smear it on here, and then I start polishing the frets. What I do is that I put it in my drill, and then I just go across, keeping it at an angle. And we'll look at the frets now, and then what they look like once I've polished them. So, after polishing the frets, I hope you can really see how much shinier and nicer they became. They feel, when you touch them, perfect, like running your finger over perfect smooth surface. I don't know what to call it. People say glass, but it's smoother than glass. This is something really simple that you can do to your guitars, even like on a regular basis. Like, all you need is a drill and that wheel, and it's not very expensive, and it lasts for a long time. I've done countless guitars this way, and it doesn't take much time. It's a little bit of elbow grease, and you just have to put some force into it, but otherwise than that, it's really not hard. So I really recommend it, and it makes a big difference on your guitar. Now all I have to do is remove this masking tape and then put some oil on the fretboard. But other than that, we're done with the neck. So next up is the body. So we're going to take care of the body of the guitar, and we're going to try to do, the first thing we're going to try to do is we're going to make it feel like the finish has been worn in by years and years of playing. And if you've played an old Stratocaster, that is a very comfortable thing, especially around this area where your arm will rub against the finish. That's the place you feel it the most. Also on the back, in the belly carve, it's a place where you also feel it the most. But I like to do it all over the entire body, just because I like to keep the finish the same all over, because it's going to get a little bit duller once we're done with it. And you can do it just here if you want to go for something that looks more relict or something like that, but I'm not really trying to relic this guitar. I'm just interested in getting it to more feel like an old guitar. And so what I'm gonna do first is that I'm gonna use a sander. You can do this with sandpaper, it's just gonna take a lot longer. And I'm gonna use some water that I have in a glass over here, and then I'm gonna use sandpaper, and I'm using around 1200 grit. You can do 800 and then walk up, but I just take 1200 and I just started that, and I just do that. And I'm just gonna sand the entire body. So that's what we're gonna do now. And I'm just gonna start with hitting the face of it and then the back. And then I'm gonna hand sand the side of the guitar. And that's just because, as you can see on my machine, it's flat and it doesn't really get into the contours of the body very well. So that's what I'm gonna do now. So I start up by just putting some water on the guitar and smearing it out, and then starting the machine. So when you're sanding, especially around the contour of the armrest, think carefully about how you move your sander, because it's very easy for it to sand through the finish here, because the flat bottom against the curvature makes it very easy to go through. So be extra careful and mindful of how you move your sander when you're over this spot. And maybe even do it in sections to make sure you don't go through, because then you'll have a line across the face down in that direction, and that won't look very good. Especially, I mean, if you're trying to make it look relic, that's a weird form of relic. So don't do it even if you're doing it for relicking. So now we've sanded the entire body, and it is time to put some car polish on it. You don't need to spend extra money buying something super special, just, you know, buy something that seems like it will do the job. And all we're gonna do is we're gonna smear it all over this guitar body, and we're gonna use some tissue paper for it. But I don't use a regular tissue paper, I use tissue paper for car polishing, which looks like some sort of polyfiber thing. It's probably made out of some sort of fabric. And all I do is I take it, rip off a piece, I fold it up into something that I can handle a little bit easier. I shake the bottle. I've already shaken it a bit, but you know, you have to do it on camera so that people believe that you actually did shake it. And then I'm just putting some on. It's always, doesn't really matter if you put too much on, you can always take it off. And then I'm just smearing it out over the entire body, getting a nice even coat. Something like this. Take some on the sides as well. I'll do the sides separately. I go through and take the top and then the back and then the sides, and I let that sit for a couple of minutes. In the hardware store you can buy these polishing pads that fit in your drill, just a couple of bucks, and you can polish a lot of guitars with it. And then you can, when you see that it starts to get matte, I don't think you can see it on this guitar right now, but it's starting to sink in. I just take the drill and I just polish over the entire surface. And I go back and forth and back and forth, and I work it into the finish. And I press down pretty hard, try to compress this down a bit So it takes a little bit of elbow grease, but it's easier to do it with the drill than to do it by hand, which you can also do, but it will take a lot longer. Take some clean tissue, and then just run it over it to get rid of any excess. And as you can see, hopefully, it has gotten some sheen back, but not a lot. But it's super smooth and comfortable on my hand. It has that silk feel. So when my arm, when I play, rubs against this, it's going to be super comfortable. And then we just do the same thing on the back, smear some of that on, take the tissue again and just put it out all over in an even nice coat. Just smear it on. Try to take some of the sides, just the round over basically, if I haven't been overly explanatory over the fact that I'm taking just the roundovers, making sure, try to get as little finish as I possibly can into the cavities, not because it matters that much, but it's always nice if things are neat, especially like when you're making your own guitars. Not that I made this, but you know what I mean. And then I just let it sit for a while until I can see that the finish is starting to doll up and sink in. Go back and forth maybe a little bit where I can see spots that don't have an even coat. You know, it's always check what you're doing while you're doing it to make sure you don't do something wrong. And then when you feel like you can see the finish going in, you just repeat the steps. You take the drill, you take the sponge, and you and once you're pretty happy with it, you take a rag and you go over it and you just remove the excess and you put some elbow grease into it, maybe make the surface a little bit warm. And then it's on to the sides. You basically do the same step and you just polish them up. But the next step is that I'm gonna shield pickup cavities and the control jack. You can also do that by painting it with shielding paint. This area is a little bit trickier than the rest. So what I do is I measure out a big piece that I think will fit, and then I push it against and I try to get an even shape into it of this half. And then I cut that out, make sure it fits, reshape it a little bit if it doesn't, and then I put it in to the next level, and I do the same thing but for the other side, where I scrape it against this side and I get a line to cut to, I take it out, and then I follow that line instead. And that's how I'd make it easy for myself to find something that will fit in there. And then I just pull one side of the tape off and I press it in there as neatly as I can. Something like that. I missed a little bit in that corner, but that's okay. I can just put a tiny little bit of tape in there and it will sort itself out. So now it's time to go through the entire body and put some solder in all the joints of the tape that we put down. So for example, here in the middle, I hope you can see there is a seam. And basically all we need to do is to melt some solder and try to make it stick. Okay, now that I have gone through and soldered joints everywhere, I am going to put the ground wire in. And this is how I do it, and it's just because it's what I think a really easy way to make sure that it is secured to the body, and that is that I take the wire that I'm going to use and I pull away the outer shield, exposing the copper wire, and then I take the copper wire and I twist it around like you would normally do, so it becomes a long thin rod. Then I take a nail, a regular, building a wall inside your house, everyday nail, and I twist it around it, and then I twist it around itself on the opposite end. Now what that does is it allows me to make a tiny little ring, basically, which I hope you can see. And all I do is that I put solder on this to solidify it, basically. Especially where they meet. So I melt the solder into the ring, make sure I get a good even coat. And all I have to do then is that I have to decide where I want to put the wire, because I don't want it to be in the way, and I also obviously don't want it to be somewhere where it can cause problems for any other electricity that is in the guitar. So what I do is I take an awl and I decide somewhere where I want to put it. And usually somewhere around this area, I think, is a good place. So I just take the awl and I push it down into the wood, press enough to go through the tape and also a bit into the wood. And now what I do is I take the wire and I take this tiny little screw, which I hope you can see that I have, and I put it in the ring that I've made. I then take a screwdriver and I screw it into the body, and that will make the wire sit against the tape in the body very securely. So now, as you can see, hopefully it's been screwed in place, and we could maybe even cement it. And now we can take some more solder and we can just remelt everything to make sure everything has a super nice connection to each other. Something like that. It's probably going to work. And then I can just leave this other wire alone for now, and this will then get stripped a bit and soldered to the back of the volume pot, but we'll take care of that later on when we go to the assembly part. We're gonna start off by going through the electronics. So first off, we're gonna check these pots to make sure they are good and ready to go. Now, they are supposed to be 250K. That's usually what you see inside a Strat-like guitar. So what I'm going to do is take my multimeter and I'm going to put it to the setting that is closest to 250K ohms, which is, for me, 2000K. Now, if you put your I don't know what these are called, pokey things, your measuring sticks, on the first and last leg, they should give you a reading that tells you exactly the value of them. I'm gonna see if I can put these inside so you can see it. Hopefully you can see it. And then we're gonna put one on the first, which is the one furthest away, and one on the last one, which is the closest one. And then we get a reading, and we can see that that's not right. Wait, we're not supposed to have to readjust these. Let's see. If we try that again, I get a reading of 5. I don't know if you can see that. If I put this closer. If I put this in here, I still get a reading of 5. I get a reading of 5. But wait, let's try another one. hard to do this so that you can see it. 400, okay. That would mean that these are 500k pots. We're gonna have to take them off and see if that's what's written on them. So these two are apparently, if I'm correct, 500k pots. They're not exactly what they read out. This one is a 495-96 pot, and this one is a 470 pot. So they're most likely 500k pots inside this guitar, which is, you know, perfectly reasonable. You don't have to have 250k pots in a single coil guitar. I just assumed that it was going to be. But this one is a 5k. No, a 5. This one is faulty, I would reckon. So we're gonna have to remove them and see. But I want to also take a measuring the pickups while I'm doing this. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to move this to 20k, because I don't believe that there is a possibility for them to be anywhere close to 20k. They're probably somewhere along the line of, I don't know, let's say 5 or 6k. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put this over here so that you can see, hopefully. Here's the display that's going to show what it is. And then I'm just going to take these and I'm going to hold them on each connection and see what kind of value I get. So this one, the neck one, seems to be a 5.8, and the middle one seems to be, let's see, okay, seems to be a 5.7, and then bridge seems to be a 5.8. So yeah, that's basically what I assumed. Now the next thing I want to do is I want to move this over to my sound check. Hopefully you can hear that. That beeping sound lets me know if current goes through. So, for example, I can't really see that there is a grounding connection between these pots. So if I hold on this one and I touch this one, well, they're still grounded to each other. Now I want to see, are the pickups grounded? So I hold it at the ground connection. It's the bare wire on the back of the pickup. And I can see that that ground wire is connected. And I just go through and I do this on all three of the pickups. So that's good. But now I want to make sure that the selector switch work. So I'm going to put it at the neck pickup, hold this there, and then hold this one where the ground connection is. And I can hear that it works. So now I'm going to move it over to the middle and check if the same thing goes for the middle one. And now that I know that it does, I'm going to go to the bridge pickup and see if that one works. And I can hear a sound. That means that it works. I'm also going to check the two middle positions just to be sure that nothing's weird in between. And it seems to be doing its job. So now I'm checking the neck and middle as well. So what I assume is the problem here is that the volume pot does not work as it's supposed to do. So we could open it up and try to see if there's something weird with it, that something is stuck or something like that. But I think that we might as well just replace it. First I'm going to take these off and see if they are actually 500k, because if these are 200k pots, if that's what is written on them, then they are faulty too, because they're not supposed to go over 200k, you know. I mean, if they're 251 or something like that, then that's okay, but if they're like 400 or something, then they're way off. So first off, I'm going to take a look and see what value these pots are supposed to have, because it's written on the other side of them. And then we're going to take these pickups out and we're going to pot them to see if that can help with the quality of the pickups. I've decided when I started this build, and if you've seen the first episode, you already know this, but I decided that I wasn't going to change anything out for any new parts unless I had to. So I think I'm going to have to replace this one. And that's just because it's broken. But we'll see about that. That won't be a big deal, and a new pot doesn't cost that much, so I feel like that's an okay thing. And I mean, it doesn't have anything to do with the quality of the guitar really, because if you have a really expensive Fender custom shop guitar and you play that all the time, at some point you are going to break the pots and you are going to have to replace them. And if you have to do it in 1 year, yeah, sure, they might be poor quality, but if you have to do it after like 10 years and you gigged it and played it every day, then you know, stuff breaks, nothing lasts forever. This guitar is 20 years old, and I don't know who had it before me, and maybe they played it a lot, so it doesn't necessarily need to be a bad quality pot. It can actually be that it's just old. First off, we're gonna remove these pickups, and first we have to just remove them from the back of the pot, and this is a little bit fiddly, but it's not that hard to do. Just heat up the solder, and when the solder is soft, we just pull the black wires off. Okay, so here's the switch, and as you can see, you just have to see what wire goes from this big black one to ground, and also has a white cable that goes to a lug on the switch. And then all you have to do is basically you heat that up and you pull the cable out, and then you pull the next one up and you pull that out. And if you accidentally remove some other switch, then there are actually just 3 other switches left on the switch, so it's not a big deal. You have the one that goes from the 2 middle ones, in this case, to the volume pot first leg, and that's just basically the selector for which position gets to be cut to the wire, the volume. And then you have the 2 other positions right here that are just like which one of the pickups you choose to have a tone pot to, and you can switch one of these out for the last one that is bare and no one is using. And that could mean that you want to have a tone control for the bridge pickup instead. Usually on Stratocasters, there's one volume for all the pickups, and then there are 2 tone controls, one for the middle and one for the neck. But you can change that by just moving one of these wires over there. But now pickups are loose from the pickguard, and all I have to do is take the screws out and they are free to be potted. I'm going to show you how I pot pickups, and if you want to, you could also try just taking the magnets off and see if that gives you an interesting new sound. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to keep the pickups the way they are. But if you think that would be an interesting thing to see me do, I can totally make a video where we take a pickup and we change the magnets out for all kinds of different magnets, like Alnico 5 or Alnico 2 or 7 or whatever, or some completely different kind of magnet. and then see how the sounds change. So let me know if you think that's an interesting video to make, and I'll try to do that. So, here are the pickups, and if we remove the covers, this is how they look. They don't look like they're underwound or anything like that. I've seen a lot of cheap pickups from guitar kits and like cheaper guitars, and these are definitely on the cheaper side, but they don't seem to be overly underwound. I've seen pickups that are like half the size of this, so hopefully when this guitar is all finished they will not need to be replaced. Obviously there are super high quality pickups that cost more than this entire guitar cost me that would make the sound a lot better, but for now we don't really need that, and we might not ever need that. So what I'm going to do now is that I'm going to show you guys how I pot pickups, because I have built my own little thing to do that. And if you're interested in making your own pickups, or you have a guitar that have pickups that need to be potted, maybe this can be an interesting way for you to do so. Okay, so this is my invention. It's super simple, and you can make it yourself if you wanna. And it's just a piece of wood that I've cut to fit over a pan, the hole in it, and then I have a jar that I've filled up with beeswax and melted for potting. And all I do is I stick it in this hole, and I take a piece of scrap wood and I plug it in so that it sits tightly, and then I take my pan, and before I fill it with water I make sure that this pan sits in there, and you can't see this now, but I make sure that I look inside to make sure that the bottom doesn't touch the bottom of the pan, because I'm going to fill it with water and let the water that boils melt the wax. So that's what I'm going to do now. Put this to the side. And fill this up with water. Put it on the stove. Put some heat on. And put this in the water. Something like that. And then just wait for it to start melting. Okay, so now it's been boiling for a while, and it's all, I'm gonna see if I can show you, it's all melted and good to go. So what I do is I take one of the pickups and I remove the cover from it, and then I have a tool that lets me clamp onto the wire. So I clamp onto it, and then I just put the pickup in. Try not to burn myself. And it's kinda hard to show. Hopefully you can see that there are bubbles rising up from the pot right around here. And all I'm doing basically is I'm moving the pickup a little bit around, and then I'm leaving it in there until there are no bubbles left. Because once I know that all the bubbles have stopped, that means that there is no air still trapped inside. And so I'm basically just waiting for that, because that means that all the air has been replaced by wax. And once that's done, I'm just going to take it out. So I'll see you when that's happened. Okay, so now it's been sitting here for quite a while. Actually took me about 20 minutes, which is surprising even to me. But anyway, there are no more bubbles, and that means that we're ready to take it out. So I have a piece of tissue, and I'm just taking it up gently, and then put it on the paper, and I gently just pat it down to get rid of the most wax I can. It's very warm, so try to be careful so that you don't burn yourself, and then put it to the side. And then there is nothing more to it than to put the next one in. But I'm not gonna film me doing this to all 3 pickups, because I think you get the idea and don't really need to watch more. Okay, so while the pickups cool down from being potted, let's take a look at this control right here. And first off, let's see if they are actually 500k, and if they are not, then we'll figure something out, like what the hell is wrong with them. But if they are, we're just gonna switch this one out, because that's definitely not a 500k pot. And the way you see if they are supposed to be 500k is that it says so up here. If it's not actually is another question, but let's see if we can get these off. Okay, let's take a look at these. So this is the volume pot, and it is a 500k pot. And yeah, the other 2 are also 500k, which mean that I'm going to replace this one with this 500k pot. And basically just because I've already measured this and it works fine. It had a value of, let's see if I can remember, 507, so it's a little bit over the value that we had before. I mean, it's a little bit over, but the old one was very, 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 very low under its value. I mean, 5 is a long way from 500. Anyway, so I'm just going to put that in there. Put the new washer and screw it on, and we'll clean everything else up and screw the other ones on later, but we don't need to do anything with them right now. All we need to do is put these wires back where they are. We don't really need the other pots at this moment. So let's start out by putting some tin on these lugs. And then we can simply start with the wire from the switch and just heat it up and move it from this pot over to this pot. And it's really that simple. Let's see if we can put a little bit of a new solder on, because I don't really like how that ended up looking. And then we can just take the middle wire and move to the middle of the new switch. And putting the wire through. And then I'm just gonna take some new solder and put it on like that. And now basically the wiring for this pot is done. I can put a ground wire here or just bend it over there to ground it, but I'm actually going to do an experiment, because I've seen inside of a Paul Reed Smith Silver Sky, and if you want to do the electronics in a Silver Sky, you need 3 pickups that have 605 4K resistance in them, and then you need a 300K volume and two tone pots that are 250. And then you put a tiny little resistor that goes between the connection from the three-way switch to the volume pot to ground, instead of putting in a ground wire. And that will basically take that resistance value and ground it off. And that's what's making the pickups sound so mellow. And the value that they use is a 2.7 ohm. But I am, since I don't have those pots in here and I don't have those values on the pickups, I am going to experiment and put something else on that has a totally different value. Well, not a totally different value, but you can experiment with this. I think this is one of the amazing things with the inventive side of Paul Reed Smith, that he's basically just built a regular Stratocaster and found a tiny piece of it that no one's ever thought of and just made something completely different, which I think is a really cool thing. So I'm just gonna experiment with it. I think that's something that we could all do. Getting a resistor is just super easy. I actually bought one of these big boxes, and I get like all the resistors I could ever need. The only difficult part is finding what I'm looking for. Okay, so if Paul Reed Smith would use a 2.7 M, but I'm going to use a 3 M. So M is just million, you know, so instead of K for 1,000. So all I'm gonna do basically is I'm gonna put this in there and then solder it together. So from that connection there to ground. And it's gonna be super simple and easy to do, and it's not gonna be a hassle at all, hopefully. And I can't say that this is gonna be a good thing or a bad thing, but I know that that's how he rounds off the sound on the Silver Sky. He's probably experimented with this a lot to find the perfect blend between value of the resistor and the pot and the pickups. And it's probably one of the reasons why it took so long for them to design that guitar, because it sounds like one of those things that would take a long time to do. So there you have it. I hope you can see it. But basically, you have the first connection that comes from the switch, and that's where you decide what pickup is going to the volume pot. This is where the signal goes out to the jack. And here I have a resistor. Now all I have to do is put these back in and solder the ground connections here, put the pickups back into the switch and then into the pickguard, and we're done. Alright, now the pickups are back in the scratch plate and the pots are also reinstalled. So now basically what we have left to do is reattach all the ground wires together and all controls for the pickups. So basically what I'm going to do first is I'm just twisting them together, all the ground wires for the pickups, and soldering them together, and then I'm going to just take and put them back on the back of the volume pot. And now I'm going to first off attach the lead wires from the pickups back. And the way this works is super simple. This switch, when it's in that position, it's basically going like that, which means that the first of these 3 lugs, this one, that is the bridge, and the last one, that one, that's the neck. And so first we have to figure out which one is which one. This is the neck, so it goes there, and all we need to do is put it in, and now we can check it to see if the connection is right. And it is. Now we just need to figure out which one is the middle pickup, which is this one, and put that one there in the middle. And if you're doing this and it doesn't turn out right, it's not a big deal. You can just re-solder. I'm gonna put a little bit more solder on the back of the pot first, and then I'm gonna start attaching all these ground wires, something like that. I hope that will work. And now I just have to attach the 2 ground wires, one that is going to go to the claw and one that is going to go to the jack, together with this white one. I'm later on also going to add the ground wire that I put into the body in the latest video that I did before, but that will be when we assemble it and not now, because that's the way the news goes. Let me know in the comments below if you know where that reference is from, because if you know it, that means you're cool, and I like to know if people are cool. Now we're basically done with the electronics for today. I'm gonna tape these down to make it look a little bit neater and nicer. I'm not gonna bother cutting them down or anything like that. They look okay the way they are. There's one thing left that I want to do that doesn't really have anything to do with the electronics, but I think it's an important step in what we are doing, which is making this guitar play more nicely than it's ever played before, and that has to do with the front of the pickguard. Now, as you can see, I've switched out the tips, and the reason why I did that is because they were so horribly dirty, like insanely dirty, that I decided that it was easier to just switch them out. And also, all 3 of these pickup covers were in different colors, and I just thought that it doesn't affect the tone, and if you don't have that problem, you can just not do that. But I just felt like personally like it's worth doing. I'm just telling you that I switched these parts out because I said I wasn't going to switch anything out, but I am switching things out more and more the further along we're getting, and it's a bit of a failure on my part, I suppose, but it's only a couple of bucks, and I feel like it's making this guitar look $100 better, so that's why I'm doing it. The next thing that I'm gonna do, that I think is a super important part, is if you ever play an old Strat, the pickguards are usually not very sharp, like this one is. They have a rounded over edge, and that's because this part right here has been basically smoothed down because of your arm moving over it. And I'm gonna just take a razor blade and scrape along the edge, rounding it over, and so you can see how much nicer that round over looks, and it's gonna feel a lot better also. Obviously this is on the underside, so it doesn't really matter, that's just a cosmetic thing. But on the upper part, where your arm goes against the pickguard, the round over is gonna feel nice against the arm as you play. You don't really want any sharp edges, especially not along the inner part of your arm. It's a very vulnerable piece of skin right there. And I'm gonna take some 1200 grit sandpaper and just smooth them out a tiny bit more. We're gonna start off by fixing the bridge. I've cleaned it with soap and water and also some anti-rust spray that you can buy in any store for just a couple of bucks. It's absolutely not something that is expensive at all, and you can use it on every guitar and it lasts a long time. So I definitely recommend that you invest in some sort of anti-rust protection for your guitars, especially if you live in a climate that can be hard on your electronic devices and your hardware parts. But the thing was that I was just gonna assemble it again after cleaning it. But then I noticed this on the block that I was gonna repurpose, and I was gonna show you that you can actually use these. But if you look really closely, and I hope I can show you this on the camera, it's actually falling apart. I don't know if you can see. It's like almost like as if it's made out of sand. Here you can see how easily I just poke with a metal spike at it and it just falls apart. And I don't know if that has to do with the quality of the guitar when it was made or the abuse it's been through. But I don't feel there is any point in putting this back into the guitar. This is a part that is gonna have to be replaced really soon, and I'm gonna have to take the entire guitar apart again. Well, not exactly the entire guitar, but I'm gonna have to do a lot of that to get to this part. And so it feels like it's another one of those steps that I can just do now and replace it with something that is of better quality and that will last longer and that hasn't been damaged beforehand. So I've said that I wasn't going to switch any parts out unless I actually really had to, and I feel like this is one of those things that I just have to do. This is not a very high quality thing for the guitar to have, and this particular part is also a bad one. So what I did was that I ordered a new one that I have over here. And the reason why I only bought a new block was because I could obviously have switched out the entire bridge for a totally new system that was higher quality. But I felt like, since I said I wasn't going to actually switch anything out, I feel like the lesser evil of the two is to just switch out the block. Obviously, if you don't have these problems, you can just switch out the entire thing, or you can just not switch anything out. You decide yourself. It's the same thing with the other videos. Everything I've shown you, you can take just the steps that you think you need or that you think will be good for you and apply them. You don't have to do everything that I show you. You can just take the parts of the videos that you enjoy. But this one will be really easy. All we really need to do is unscrew these and then put this one over and screw it in. And so we're going to do that now. And now we just take the actual bridge and put it on the trem block, and we just take our screws and we put them through, and we screw them down, but we don't tighten them too much because we need to be able to adjust things so that every screw gets in. Okay, so I screwed them in and I realized something that is not right, and that is the arm trem. The arm for the tremolo isn't really, it doesn't fit, which is very strange because I ordered this to fit this particular bridge. I looked at this company's page and I figured out which one it was supposed to be, but never mind. I'm not going to order a new one because that's going to take too long. It already took way too long to get this one. So what I do is that I'm just going to drill this out. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm taking a washer that is the same size, and then I'm taking a pen and I'm just making sure it has the same size, and then I'm pushing it over until it aligns with the hole that is on the underside. And then I can collar that in. And then I just stain the lines a bit to make sure it looks neat. It doesn't have to be perfect in this particular step because it's going to look better once you actually use a Dremel to carve it out. And the reason why I use a Dremel to carve it out is because if I try to put a drill bit there, it will wander into the hole. So what I have to do is basically just take a Dremel like this, diamond cutter, and just carve it out. But first I have to unscrew this trem again, and then we can start cutting into it. When doing this sort of work, don't forget to wear ear protection and eye protection, because you don't want to get metal in your eyes. It's not a fun thing, I promise you. And so, now we've fixed that. It doesn't look perfect, but at least we're going to be able to use the tremolo arm with this block, and we're also going to, like, no one is ever really going to look that closely. It's going to be one of those weird things that you know about your guitar but that no one else does. And if you want to, you could put like a sticker or something weird over it, or put some metal putty to cover up the old hole. So now we only have to like put everything back together with the new block. And it's gonna be an awesome guitar in the end. And this is obviously not something I would recommend. I would recommend that you maybe actually contact the sellers and, you know, get it back. But since I'm on this schedule where I have to get this done, and I have other things to do. I don't like to wait that long for it to the new one to arrive, and I don't want to go through the hassle of doing all that work, calling people and stuff like that. And also, it took a long time for it to get, and maybe that has to do with COVID or something, but I'd rather just put this back together the way it is now and be done with it. But normally you would probably contact the seller of this block and say, hey, why doesn't it fit? But that doesn't matter. It's a cosmetic thing that I don't really care about. So that's what you should do. Okay, so the next step is basically screwing every part back together. I have some gunk left on my screws that are right here. I don't know if you can see that, but they look a bit dull and dirty. And so I put them in a Scotch pad like this, and I just screw on them with a screwdriver because it's easier to move the big handle, and that lets me clean them up. You can also take the screw and rub it back and forth over the pad and just go back and forth. You only have to do this for a couple of minutes. Obviously, you can use some sort of acids to remove the rust and things like that, but I don't feel like it's necessary. If you've put the anti-rust on, they're not gonna get dirtier. So here's the screw before and after. I hope you can see that there is a lot of difference. So I'm just going to continue, and I'm going to clean all of these screws, and then we'll be back when it's time to actually put them in the guitar again. Okay, so now it's time to put them back, and all I have to do is take a screw and put it in the hole on the back, and then put a spring on the other side, and then take the saddle on the other side and screw it into it. And I like to go like something like that to begin with. Of course, once you set the intonation for the guitar, you're going to move the saddle back and forth by adjusting this screw, but that's not yet. Still have to get this done first. And there it is. Looks almost brand new. Except if you look really closely though. Haha. Okay, so the next step is to take care of the tuners. Now, we all know, and it's quite obvious, that upgrading the tuners to higher quality tuners is always a better option. But that would add price to the guitar. And you don't necessarily have to. But what you can do is you can clean them up, and then you can fix them, because they are a bit loose at the moment right now. So you can take these tuners that are a bit on the cheaper side, let's call them that, and make them better, like this one right here. It's a lot more sturdy than the other ones. Now obviously I'm going to show you one tuner, but I do this to all of them. The first thing is I take a tight grip like this, and I make sure that the tuner can't move, and then I tighten the screw that is on top of the head, because if you don't hold it tightly, the head is just going to want to spin when you tighten the screw, and you'll not actually get it any tighter. The next thing that I do to make these run a little bit smoother is I take thin synthetic oil, which is something that is usually used for bikes and stuff like that, and I put some and let it drip into it. Now I go in the upper corner where the tuner pillar that is for the string, and where the body that holds the gears sit. And then I just hold it firmly in my hand and I turn it around a couple of times, and as I turn it, the oil seeps in. This can take a while, so let it just, after you've turned it a couple of times, maybe 30 times or something, just put it down and let it sit and let the oil seep in. This is something that isn't very expensive, but can really add value to your tuners, because you will definitely notice a difference. And then I just set the tuners aside and I have them sitting upright like this until I'm going to put them into the guitar, because if you put them on the side you're going to start having the oil run out, which is of course not ideal. So there they are now. Now some of you might say, well, won't the oil just run out when it's on the headstock and, you know, get into the wood or something like that? And my answer is no, because we're gonna secure the tuners with these afterwards that I hope you can see that I'm holding, which basically goes into these grooves where we put the oil, so you don't really have to worry. I understand if some of you are like, oh, I don't want something weird in my tuners, but they are basically just gears, and gears needs to be lubricated, and the fact that it's a car or a clock or a guitar, that doesn't really matter basically, because gears are gears. Obviously, you know, more friction in a car, but never mind that. The tuners are done, and we're going to go on to the next step. So the next step is to clean the parts and make them ready for being put back into the guitar. I've already cleaned the output jack plate and the back plate for the neck, and they look good and nice, just like they're supposed to. The next thing I'm going to do is actually I'm going to clean this jack. I don't know if you can see it, but it's really dirty. So I'm just going to take a file and I'm going to smooth out some of these and try to clean it up, and I'm going to put some rust removal on, and I'm going to wait. Oh no. Oh. I think I know why this jack didn't work as good as it was supposed to. I just moved this around a bit and I realized that this is very, very loose. I would say that this is... oh, and there it went. Oh, okay, so scratch that part. We're gonna clean this thing and make that nice, and we're just gonna throw this away and get a new jack. It's one of those things that happens, apparently. I'll take a Scotch pad and I'll just move this back and forth, and we'll see what happens. And maybe I'll try to get in... yeah, no, I'm sorry, I'm just so confused over the jack that I'm starting to think things. Yeah, just move it back and forth. You can see it goes. Rust is really easy to remove. It's when you let the rust go so deep in that it eats away things that is the problem. That's why you should always take care of things as soon as possible, because I mean that's just like 5 strokes and it's already better. But yeah, so all we have to do now is basically put all the parts back on the guitar and then, you know, screw it all back together. So yeah, let's do that. Take a tiny bit of leather and I put the strap button on it, and then I take a pencil, I draw around it, take a scissor and I cut it out. I fold it in half, which I probably don't think you can see, but I do, and then I make a tiny little cut in the middle and fold it in half the other way around and do another tiny little cut, and then I can poke the screw through that hole like that, and then I unscrew it and I put the screw through, and then I put the piece of leather on the other side and I just screw it tightly into the piece of leather. If you have a hole puncher of some sort, that could make this step easier, and then you have it there and it's on the back of the. You can take a scissor and you can fine tune it a little bit and trim it down so it looks a little bit neater and nicer and more like it's made for this guitar, which I mean obviously it is. Something like that. And that's how you make those little cloth rings on the side, but you make them out of leather, and if you make them out of leather instead, they will last a lot longer. Okay, so we're going to start off by connecting the ground wire that goes from the foil on the back of the cavity to the volume pot. And first off, I'm just tinning the ground wire. And the way I do that is that I'm just putting some solder on it and just let it melt in to it. It's super easy to do, and you can just, do it. And then I take the wire and I hold it up to the pot, and just like all the other black wires on the ground, I put this one, and I just hold it in place for a bit and let the solder melt into the rest, making sure I get a nice and even connection that looks clear and nice and all. And it only takes a second to do if you heat things up correctly. And then you just take a tiny bit more solder just to push the connections together. And then you just hold it in place, remove the tip, and wait for it to cool down a little bit. You can feel it's cooling down. Then we have the other three wires. We have the one that ground wire to the claw, and the two to the output jack. Now this is going to get a little bit fiddly, but don't worry, we'll get through it together. So what I have to do basically is I have to pick up the pickguard, turn it around so it's the right way, then take the one ground wire that is going to the claw and put it through the hole so it goes to the back, and then take the other two wires, it's a white and a black one, and I have to put them through the hole. It's a bit fiddly, especially if they get stuck in something on the inside, but then we pull them through. And then we can just make sure everything lines up correctly. And as you can see, there's some tape sticking out, so we're gonna have to remove that. And so now everything looks neat, and we just have to put the screws back in to make sure everything lines up correctly. We'll just start off by screwing some of the screws that are on opposite sides in place. You just remove a bit of wire, and then you take your solder iron and just apply some to the wire and let it melt into it. And then you heat up the place where it's supposed to sit, which is this little thing that sticks out. Remove the part that is not supposed to be there. And then we just hold this wire in its new place and try to get these. It's a bit fiddly to get in there because things are always in the way, but you can just push down on it, take a bit more solder and get them to melt into each other, and then just remove the soldering iron, hold it in place, wait a couple of seconds for it to harden, and then you can just push the wire back into the cavity so it doesn't stick out in a weird way. Okay, so the last step, and then we're done with the guitar, is that we have to connect the two wires here. Now, this part here goes to this connection here, and that's where you put the black, or also called ground wire. And the white one, or red, or whatever color you have, goes to the other one. It's a super easy to know, and it has to do with the fact that if you look at the cable, it has two pieces, the long sleeve and the little knob at the end, and they get connected here. So all I have to do is basically just I hold the ground wire here and I solder it in place. So first I tin the part, and then I just take the wire and I hold it in place. It's difficult to show you, but it's not that hard to solder, so you probably know how to do it, even if you've never done it before, because it's so easy. And then just put some solder on the other end and put the wire into it. Wait for it to harden like that. And the next thing we have to do is just move it over and put it into this cavity like so. And then take two screws and just put screws in. So there it is, all done. Plays beautifully, sounds better. Well, it didn't have a functional sound when I started making it, but you know, better than scratchy, weird, glitchy sound. But anyway, it plays really nice. The neck is super smooth, and everything works really well. The controls and everything. I really like this Paul Reed-Smith Silver Sky thing that I did. I think it's a really interesting thing, so it'll be interesting to see if anyone else tries that out and tell me what you think of that. Now, let's hear how it sounds. I know you've been watching this and you probably want to know how it sounds, because, yeah, I think it sounds different now than it did before. Well, there you have it. I really hope you enjoyed this video and that you let me know what you think. Yeah, it's been fun restoring this guitar. I really like it now. I've always wanted a Sunburst Strat, and for some reason I've never had one, and now I have one and I really like it. But thank you very much for watching. Have an awesome day and keep on playing guitar or any other musical instrument that you love to play, and just make sure you have fun, because that's the most important part. Bye!